Thanks, everyone. That was a great session. I think we can kind of continue from there and talk about some of the things we just heard. But, I'd like to go back to what Stephanie kicked us off with yesterday, the Agile theme. And, just starting with that, and, I have some notes. They didn't come from a burning bush, but I've got some good notes here.
And I noticed that they were getting really, really small as you were writing.
Yeah, well, there's a lot to talk about.
Absolutely.
We have a lot to talk about.
And we had an hour and a half, not 30 minutes, right?
Oh, we have an hour and a half?
I think that's what
that's
Phil
terrific.
said. Yeah.
Wow, we've got a lot of time then.
Yeah.
Good.
Voice of
Don't have to worry
God,
about that
30
time
minutes.
warp.
We're joking. We're kidding. We're just kidding. We won't keep you for 90 minutes. But let's kick off, about, kind of these modernization trends. We were just talking about some great examples. I love hearing industry examples, right? So this stuff hits the disposal industry, right? When you start instrumenting trash cans, right?
Right.
You can instrument almost anything. But let's talk about, modernization in end user computing, how that workforce gets to be more productive and what change is happening and how organizations can get better at enabling that workforce and giving them the right tools.
Right. I think probably one of the biggest things, the theme of Agile last night, the theme of security. Where's our person asked the security question last night? This morning, transformation. I think a lot of customers are currently in paralysis. We have extremes. We have customers that are rushing towards innovation, rushing towards change, rushing towards the millennial compute strategy. And then we have other customers that are, I didn't do this in the 1990s whenever every PC that was ever manufactured was always different because there was solder and wire runs and changes in silicon mask. And by God, that might happen again. And I put in these really rigorous processes. Yeah. And those customers are missing out on change. They're spending copious quantities of money on the past instead of allocating dollars for the future. And so I was really excited with the whole AI discussion. It's a great topic. But there's so many customers out there that want to do that are spending tens or hundreds of millions of dollars to manage a PC. And using legacy approaches. And so, a lot of the work I do with customers on a daily basis is, hey, is that really what you need to be doing? Is that really the top priority for your organization? Or are there other simple approaches? And sometimes, we teach kids math or science, and we try to break that problem down to the minute details and try to build it back up and say, is there a different approach? And some customers get it. Some customers
right. They're resistant.
Very resistant. They have Bob. I call it. I don't really mean to insult anybody who surname is or given name is Bob or Robert, but Bob's my fictitious IT person. He's loved by IT department. He created all the processes. Bob is only 5 years away from retirement, and Bob is not going to change. So we're sort of stuck.
Right. Now, in Bob's defense, a lot of that stuff works, and
Absolutely.
I think that's what's really fascinating about it. When I look at this, when I look at end user computing trends, or EUC trends, as I like to call them, one thing you and I were talking about as we got to know each other leading up to this fireside chat was kind of the path that big companies like Google, Microsoft, Amazon, everyone's moving full bore into the cloud, and that includes the operating systems now, right? So the operating systems, what I like to call modern operating systems, Google's Chrome being a great example. Look at what Google's done in the education market, and now they've kind of turned their focus to the enterprise. And we're hearing rumors of Microsoft coming up with a modern operating system that some are calling Windows Lite. It's pretty secretive. I don't know if anyone here has any insights on it. I'd love to hear more if someone does know some stuff. Maybe you know some stuff, but yeah, I mean, there's some interesting opportunities that come with that model that's worked well for Google in education. They've basically usurped Apple in the education market and taken over that market, and now they're aiming at the enterprise. I've seen some isolated incidents of organizations going down this path in, in industries like oil and gas, where they had a fleet of ruggedized laptops that are really expensive, and they're like, well, maybe we could give these guys Chromebooks, put a case on it, and see what they can do. What are you seeing in that front?
Yeah, so this gets into the interesting persona dilemma that we were
Yes.
chatting about, that historically, and I was in IT at the turn of the millennial, so you can blame me for some of we got to standardize. You can buy any managed desktop as long as it's mine. Probably that was the wrong approach 20 years ago. We should have probably gotten really, really crisp on identifying personas a whole lot better. So in the strategy of around circa 2000 to 2004, where there was heavy standardization, we went too far in that extreme, and we said, hey, it's got to be a solution for 80, 90, 100% of an organization. And what we grossly overlooked was the fact that some groups of people just need some basic tools. And I think that's where the Chromebooks, maybe the Windows Lite or other interfaces become really powerful, especially as millennials enter the workforce, because, hey, they're already doing homework on their smartphones, or they're already doing homework on tablets. That they're bringing these ideas into organization, which just freaks out cybersecurity. But can we make a shift? Some organizations are shifting to say, I have office professionals. They need operating system. Hey, they could get by with G Suite or Office 365 in a browser, but at the end of the day, they need some more advanced features, which is still on the desktop, and they need to be able to print. That's it. That's a pretty simple model. That is a very, very simple model that could be done overnight. But most IT organizations are saying, well, if that model doesn't fit my engineers, doesn't fit the factory automation kiosk, doesn't fit. And so they're scared. They're scared about managing one group of people instead of all groups of people at the same time. And I think that we've got to get past that. I think that somehow or another we're able to buy different cars. Not everyone is driving the same car, same color in 2020. We might even say that there's no need for cars or car ownership in 2020, and maybe there's no need to actually own a PC in 2020. But we got to start changing, and that's the real big dilemma that I think so many organizations are fearful of. Whether it's the Bob effect, fear of change, the fact that change is accelerating. It is not slowing down. Right. People get concerned about Microsoft. Hey, we're going to give a new operating system twice a year, but they don't complain about iPhones changing almost on a monthly basis.
That's right.
Or Android or Mac. And so there's this, I call it sort of the tilt the head look of, why is it that we think of one 30-year-old operating system differently than modern operating systems? And maybe that's where we need to start changing is, sweep aside, HP makes lots of money selling PCs, so we don't want to sweep aside Windows anytime soon, but the whole mindset of how do we interact with operating system, how do we interact with devices, I think has to change because that's where college students are at today.
Right, and the new folks in the workforce that are coming in. So you've teed up, kind of my next thought, and I don't think I brought up this term to you when we were speaking ahead of this, but it's an easy one. Unified endpoint management, right? So that's something. I don't know how many folks of you are heading down this path or looking at solutions in that area, but there's a lot of investments happening, Microsoft included. Right? Microsoft's making big investments in its enterprise mobility and security or Intune offering, and other vendors are on this path where they say, oh, you know what? These modern operating systems can be managed more like a phone. Let's manage these things instead of them being in different silos, your mobile deployments and your traditional desktop deployments. Let's manage them together with one platform. And let's sprinkle in some analytics, get some enhanced visibility into those deployments, see what actually folks are doing on those phones, and let's secure them more efficiently with some more hardened security. What are your thoughts on kind of that evolution? I mean, we have some force factors happening with Windows 7 being sunsetted. That's going to force people onto Windows 10.
Yeah, we hope, right?
We hope.
Yeah.
People do hold on.
Yeah. And so we have Windows 7 going end of life. And not only that, we still have people trying to buy computers that will run Windows 7, which if anyone's trying to do that, you need to be on eBay today, buying those old computers, because that's actually 3 generations ago, and Intel processors was the last Win 7 support. So you can't buy a new computer that supports Win 7, so that's just a education point. But I think the whole unified endpoint management, to get back to your question, is certainly a necessary step. I'm not sure that it is the last step, but this whole notion of being able to manage pieces of my environment, whether it's a phone, a desktop of any operating system, a tablet, and being able to have that information come to a common location is spot on. And we've been trying to get there for, I don't know, 7 or 8 years now, with various degrees of success. There's consolidation of the industry. If we look back 7 or 8 years ago, there was probably almost a couple of dozen mobile device management, or what was the predecessor to unified endpoint management, companies out there, and certainly consolidating today. I think for it to ultimately be successful, we've got to start breaking the chains to Win32. I think everybody at this point in time, if you've tried UEMM with Windows, you know that those old legacy Win32 that requires pre and post configurations, and do you have this installed or do you have that installed, is problematic. And this is an area that Microsoft has struggled with since launching Windows 10. They thought UWP was going to solve world hunger. It's turned out not to solve world hunger. They're currently focusing on something called MSIX, which is an evolution of AppV, trying to get away from the spaghetti installation of applications, which is unfortunate that we have people, might be people in this room, that, by God, Win32 will never die. I always want to use an MSI, and I want to sprinkle DLLs all over the operating system so I can never uninstall an application to save my life. And I like writing thousands of entries to the registry because I think that's the best idea that anybody ever came up with. But until we get past that and get to more of a modern application, will UEMM be ultimately successful? I think, probably the jury's out, probably 50-50. I think that we'll still see the need in complex Win32 environment-rich areas, the need for, I'm going to say, traditional approaches to doing, whether the word legacy is the correct adjective to describe that situation, we can all debate, but we do have to be cognizant that many customers, many of you might have very complex Win32 applications that just won't work in a UEMM environment. Now, the evolution of this is getting past managing operating system and devices. So we talked a little bit about, we didn't. Well, actually, we did over there. As people were talking about millennials and innovation and what the heck to do, I think we have another dilemma that is potentially even more serious. Those millennials go and buy a $2,000 MacBook, or maybe that $6,000 Mac desktop, buy $1,100 iPhones or $1,200 Galaxies, and they bring them and want to do work on them. And certainly in the U.S., I don't know, I think there was a couple of law firms that are here. I don't want to put my foot in my mouth, but we do have a great number of legal minds in our country, and managing somebody else's property sometimes is riddled with issues. And so I'm of the belief that we have to get better at managing the security of applications and managing the security of data. Now, that's not something that's easy to do today. I'm not going to say that it's easy to do next year, but that is the evolution that we've got to get really good at. And that also comes into play whenever we start thinking about AI. How do we protect AI on a variety of different platforms with different profiles, different ownerships? The great example is smart cities. Who owns the traffic lights and the IoT on traffic? Why should I trust that information? So we have to come up with some different ways of sharing IoT devices or sharing disaggregated platforms and still maintain trust across that. And that's things that the company that I work for and other companies are currently exploring in the future is how do we maintain trust? How do we look at the future where there's all sorts of different types of applications rather than, by God, I'm going to pry that Win32 application from my code dead hands.
Yeah. No, those are great points. I think that, what you just mentioned, those issues with trust, gosh, it's hitting everyone, right? All the big boys out there in social media are adjusting to this and having to reckon with it. So yeah, I think these are challenges that we're going to see for some time now, along with privacy, right? Trust and privacy. So let's pivot a little bit. I think we had the full kitchen sink of technologies in our session, right? We talked. There's some stuff that we wanted to talk about on I think right in the title, right? The future of computing and networking. Some pretty exciting stuff happening on the infrastructure side of the business, right? Obviously, HP participates pretty heavily in that and has for forever. On this hyperconvergence, right? There's a big opportunity to streamline, optimize, cut costs. What are you hearing from customers? What's moving them towards making that investment and making that change? We've talked about a lot of these themes already. It's about Agile, but how do they get there?
Yeah. A lot of work and a plan. I think what's driving hyperconverge because certainly years ago there was a rush to the cloud because it sounds cool. I never did get an answer on what type of a cloud, whether it was the Sirius or the Thunderstorm. Anyway, we ran into a little thing called physics with a lot of companies where physics just doesn't allow the transmission of data in a timely manner from an on-premise factory location or a city location or some type of automated. We can think about automated cars. Some decisions have to be made locally. I think last night there was a conversation about, hey, do we need to keep all the data, or can we throw some of the data away at the edge, just look for the differences? Now, again, being in our legalistic society, ultimately we have to keep all the data because somebody sometime will come back and sue somebody because of some piece of noise that was not detected. But certainly from a decision-making process, the big driver is I have to make decisions faster than the network will allow me to move data. And when we're talking about terabytes and petabytes of data that's being collected, you can start seeing that, hey, the round trip just does mathematically, even if I had fiber, doesn't make sense. So we have to start looking at edge compute, and which is sort of an adjacent to the hyper-converge of in the cloud, on-prem, and dealing with data. So I think data is probably the biggest driver, being able to make business decisions, intelligence, being able to act upon data in a timely fashion versus reporting and determine intelligence. And I use business intelligence on, I have mounds of data and I want to go sift through it to find something that gives me a competitive advantage versus things where I have to make decisions within nanoseconds as a driving point. So I think the architecture is right. We can do a lot of things in the cloud very economically and very elastic, whereas things on-prem, are still require a capital investment. Will we ever see the big cloud players really own the equipment that's on-prem? I think it's going to be years before we see expansion of cloud resources and setting things outside of those big mega data centers, just from the simple fact you got administrative and overhead costs associated with that. That would be difficult in their current business models to do that.
Yeah, I think those are great points, and I see that too. I think part of the issue, and kind of back to the Bob at IT analogy, there's still a lot of mindset out there, right? That's why not everyone has made the move. They still want to be able to have control of their own data, essentially, right? They want to have that stuff on premise and be able to, have better visibility into it, or at least think that they have a better security architecture in place for it. Is that the case? I'm not sure myself, personally. I mean, it depends on how far they want to go down the security path and what measures they're going to take. But let's pivot to security, because I think, the sake of time, and
I was noticing it keeps
moving down. So security, I think it was Melanie from what's the name of the
Altria.
Thank you, Altria. Yeah. So obviously, any big company, I think they're a great example, right? They I think we have Pepsi here as well. Someone who works with their content and collaboration platforms. You mentioned legal, right? They rely heavily on those types of content collaboration platforms. Digital rights management plays heavily into it. But security is really, really getting to be complex, right? I mean, we've seen, and I think we were talking prior, and we were talking about how, I don't think we did Melanie's question justice in answering it yesterday. So let's try to give it a little more justice. How can companies get there? What do they need to do? I mean, obviously, every company is different in how sensitive their data is and what they're trying to safeguard and what they're trying to accomplish with layered security, which is, I think, kind of the de facto position that we're in right now. We're layering our security, right? We're not using one tool to secure our organization.
Right. So I'm a big believer that we need to protect data. Data is the most valuable asset. I was sharing with you a story this morning where years ago, on a particular contract that I was involved with in the old HP, before we split into HP Inc. and Hewlett-Packard Enterprise and all the various spin-offs, that a very, very, very well-protected PC, a person was manipulated by probably a foreign actor and leaked information that had PII about a particular customer. And as I was pondering that, because I had already started a sort of an internal debate with our cyber organization of why aren't we protecting data? Why is it that cyber thinks that things like BitLocker is suitable in whatever year it was to protect data? And cyber organization had, their reasons. I respectively, not being a cyber expert, being an engineer, was of the opinion that their logic was flawed. And after this event happened, I went back and said, the cost of buying this customer, the privacy insurance, would have more than have paid for the technology to protect data. Okay. And so we get into this cycle, and I think a lot of cyber organizations are looking at a checklist, whether it's with risk management companies that might provide insurance, et cetera, and they're not really understanding where the technology and how people interact with data. So I think Melanie's question was sort of spot on. I somehow know the cyber organizations continue to get massive amounts of dollars, and from a user's point of view, am I any more protected than what I was before that money was spent?
Yeah.
Don't misunderstand me. I think cybersecurity, every CISO on the planet has to be in insomnia because of the amount of attacks on organizations. But on the other hand, whenever the amount that we're spending on security far exceeds any of the other budgets, we have a dilemma. How do we make forward progress? How do we move to embrace a range of devices? How do we move to protect IoT? You know, some little company had an issue a few years ago where an HVAC system was compromised, which got to some retail information. How many organizations, cybersecurity, are protecting elevators? You know, most elevators are now very smart, and they're connected to networks and buildings. And I would dare say, my other favorite story, because it seems like most cyber organizations are really enthusiastic about controlling Windows. Conversation with a lot of customers about Cortana. You know, Cortana is evil. And you look around and you see an iPhone and the person's talking to Siri. You ask questions like, hey, do you have a policy about if somebody's working at home that they need to unplug Alexa? And no. And it's like, dude, you know, how many times has Alexa answered a question without asking the key word? It happens more often than I want at my house. So it's like, no, I didn't ask you that question, and you answered it. So it becomes a very interesting conversation about cybersecurity and policies, a single 30-year-old operating system versus newer operating systems, newer devices. So I think the balance has to come in, and we have to apply some logic and what it is that we're trying to mitigate risk on versus I just need to spend another spending another $10 million will protect this particular risk, or another $20 million over here. We should take a step back and start thinking about what it is we want to protect versus spending money. So I think that's what Melanie was trying to articulate last night.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you know, the other side of it that I'm starting to look at, and we're running out of time here, but you know, back to analytics, right? It's end user behavior analytics is kind of the buzzword you know that I think a lot of security firms are chasing. And of course, I don't know who coined the term, but UBA, right? You can detect a lot of anomalous behavior by just taking a closer look at how that device or endpoint is being interacted with, right? The location, the application being used,
the amount of data being, you know, hey, this person has never downloaded anything, and now all of a sudden they've downloaded 10 gigabytes today. Why?
Right, exactly.
So there is a lot of analytics-driven detection. And most of the time, bad actors, especially foreign actors, are very patient. Might take months. Our cyber organization took and has an example where over the course of about 9 months, somebody was trying to gain access by exploiting or attempting to exploit a single port every other day from different locations. Wound up being a single bad actor, but most foreign bad actors are not the ones that are being malicious and creating ransomware. It's the people who are really after your core competency, your core intellectual property.
Good stuff. Yeah, we can go on that topic. I think that's a topic that unfortunately will probably be with us for some time.
Yeah, so we can talk about the next time I get invited back. Yeah.
All right. Do we have any questions? We're on our last minute here, so we'll see if we have any questions.
Time for one quick question, or we have two. We have two hands up. So
we're going to get to go overtime.
Right.
Or I have to answer really quick, or you have to answer really quick.
I'll try to keep the question short. You mentioned that data is the most valuable asset, and I absolutely agree with you. I'm wondering if you're looking at, I'm in the financial industry, and the open banking legislation is happening in Europe, where ultimately, if I really dumb it down, the consumer owns their own data.
Mm-hmm.
Who owns the data in the IoT devices? If I sit in a self-driving car, who owns the data about which intersection I cross, etc.? And where do you see this going? Data ownership in general.
Yeah, what is it? It's going to be another 20 years before ever the law is settled on GDPR. I'm hoping that if I'm in an autonomous car that somebody smarter than me is owning and using the data. I don't want to initiate my GDPR rights while I'm traveling down the motorway at maybe in Germany at a fine rate of speed. Financial industry certainly falls into a category that requires very, very rigorous security and audit. I think all data needs to have some type of auditability, but all data should be protected. We should have this conversation 10 years from now to see if we figured out where the line is between data ownership and individual privacy, because it's a very, very complex title. Things like whenever GDPR was in motion, I happened to be at Microsoft, and some of the guys there were talking about, hey, I have the right to privacy, and the Microsoft attorneys, not that they have any, were asking some European attorneys, well, if you have the right to privacy, how do I have a right to charge you for a license? If I know that you have a license and you ask for me to erase it, does that mean that your license is terminated? At one extreme, would be a true statement. So I think that the lawyers around the world are going to have lots of fun and be employed for a long time to answer those questions.
Yeah, we've got a lot of legislation coming, probably.
At the very beginning, you were talking about the end-user computing and the modernization of that. In many years, we've spent reducing the cost of managing all these endpoints. Now you're saying, hey, personas, variety, adopt the flexibility. How are you getting organizations to reconcile the cost of doing that while trying to provide that, service?
Yeah, I think it gets back to the agility and wanting to be able to, there's soft cost and real cost, right? Some of the soft costs that the IT organizations have to endure is individuals complaining about their experience, people calling help desk for issues that IT organizations have implemented that is different than the core part of the operating system. So in my hypothesis is anywhere from 20 to probably 60% of any organization, excluding financial or any audited required company. So I'll cast my friends in the banking and insurance industry over to the side for a moment. Probably can be a cloud user or a very simplified user. And if I hand you, in today's world versus 20 years ago, in today's world, if I hand the average person a Windows notebook, they're probably productive. If I hand them a Windows notebook that is managed by IT, they may or may not be productive. Or IT and cybersecurity may have taken an i7 and basically gave it the performance of a Pentium. So whenever you look at those types of personas, are we better off as an organization to work with that group of people and enable that group of people to be highly productive at a lower price point? Then I have to have a solution that is fully managed, lots of infrastructure, lots of distribution points, lots of this, lots of that, lots of testing, lots of support desk. I'm going to say that if I can make 60% of my organization never call and send me a nasty note, I'm probably a whole lot happier, and I can divert energy to doing things like AI, which we talked about this morning, which is a hot topic everywhere. But a lot of organizations say, hey, I got to deal with this Windows thing, or I got to deal with this Mac thing, or I got to deal with my cybersecurity. I have no money other than to go and do some experiments. I'm not able to move forward in a modern world. Would we be better off, I guess to close, would we be better off letting millennials do what millennials want to do if we can figure out how to protect the data? Or are we better off being real rigorous in managing devices? Again, there are industries where we need rigorous management of devices. It's not an option, but there's so many of the Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 that if I can enable a few million people to be productive on day one, that's a good thing.
That's winning, yeah. All right. I think that wraps us, Coop. That was great.
Oh, yeah, look, we got some extra time. We didn't get that full 90 minutes, but we did.
Thank you so much, gentlemen.